Hey guys, this is Pastor Autry, and thank you for joining us for another Men's Bible Brief. Don't forget, every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. via Zoom, brothers are having great conversations in the Word. The information's on the screen if you can join us. If you can't, don't worry. We're posting the speakers portion right here. Hey, give us a like, give us a share. Let us know how we're doing, for we want to do this for your enrichment. Also, too, don't forget, y'all, we're kicking 2022 off with a great theme, giving God our best, and we're going to start it off with the fast starting on January 2nd. You can find out more information about the fast right here, 21-day fast, on our YouTube channel, as we're posting information how to prepare for the fast. What a wonderful way to kick the year off. We're going to have a great time in God. Well, I've talked long enough. Let's join the Men's Bible Brief in progress. God bless you. Talk to you soon. Take care.
Our speaker for today is a man that has chaired the Christ Community Deacons Chair for the last few years, and he's done a wonderful job there. And he is ending his tenure at the end of the year, and we thought it may be fitting for him to come in and just give us a word as we end this year and go into the new year. And we're happy to have him. So fellas, help us welcome and give him your undivided attention, Deacon Willie Hall. Willie?
Thank you, Anthony. Let me first start by saying I appreciate this opportunity to speak. This subject has been a subject that I've been toying around with for about the last 2.5 years. I've been kind of thinking about this subject, and I've started out with a 1-hour presentation with music and slides and transitions that I was thinking of a way of presenting this, and it's changed over the last couple of years depending on the format. So Pastor has us going through a series of a journey to know him. So I've kind of put this together in a similar style, and it's called H.I.M, H-I-M. And I have it titled Crying Sometimes, My Journey with My Father. And the H represents healing. The I represents intentionality, and the M represents and so I have 3 scriptures that I've tagged for each of these acronyms. So for healing, I have John 8:36. And it reads from the English Standard Version, "So if the Son sets you free, you are free indeed." For intentionality, I have Acts 9:18, and that reads from also the English Standard Version, "And immediately something like scales fell from his eyes, and he regained his sight. Then he rose and was baptized." And for M, maturation, I have Romans 12:2, and that reads, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." And so I'm going to try to get through this without crying sometime, at least not during the 12 minutes of this. And this is my way of trying to debunk this whole notion that men aren't supposed to cry, that we have to be warriors and warriors only, that we can't show the cracks and kinks in our armor. And this came to me one night when I was sitting up by myself after the family had been put to bed, like I normally do. And I was just listening to music. I kind of got trapped in YouTube listening to various songs and suggestions based on their algorithm. And I came across a song, and it got me to thinking and reflecting on past moments. And I got a little nostalgic, and I got a little tearful. And that led me to chase another song that caused me to get a little bit more tearful, and another song and another. And I got to thinking about how relieved I felt after shedding these tears in the dark by myself, listening to the music. And so I got to thinking about, why is it that we as men don't cry? And so if you guys would indulge me, I'd like to take you through my journey, because I've thought several ways. How do I communicate this to an audience? And at first it was communicated to an audience of men and women. And then for this one, how do I communicate this to men without sounding preachy, like I know better than you? And the only way that I could think to do that was to tell you my own personal journey, to give you my testimony. And so for healing, I would say growing up, I had a very tumultuous relationship with my father. To say that my father did not read from his son's script on how to be a great father and husband would be an understatement. In fact, where my dad took his guidance from is unknown to me. But to say that my father wasn't the greatest father in the world, or wasn't the best father or best husband in the world, is laughable, because it was apparent. And this led me to be very angry and to be very resentful. In fact, it caused me to start living unbeknownst to myself and in spite of you life. So everything that I did in spite of my father. I excelled in school in spite of my father, because you weren't there helping me with the ABCs. You weren't in my life until I was 8 years old. I excelled in sports in spite of my father, because he wasn't out there in the yard tossing the ball with me, or helping me to work on a jump shot, or me how to swing a bat, or to field a ground ball. So all of these things that I did, in my mind, I did in spite of him. And it would always anger or humor me whenever I would hear my father bragging about me. Oh, he's on the A honor roll, or he did X, Y, and Z in sports, and he's a team captain, and it would anger me, and sometimes it would humor me, because in my mind, my dad contributed to none of that. And so everything that I did, I wanted to be in contrast of who I believed or thought him to be. And that included the way in which I dated women. My father was the example of father was a rolling stone, and where he laid his hat was his home. My dad, if you look in the dictionary, his picture is right there next to infidel and infidelity. I have 3 siblings, and we're like stair steps. If we were a basketball playoff series, best of 5, then you would say the first game went to my sibling's mother, games 2 and 3 went to my mother, and then games 4 and 5, when on the closeout games, went to my sibling's mother, because that's how my father's children's were conceived. And so my father, even when him and my mother got back together on a permanent basis, was never faithful. And this drew my ire. And it was through this that the Spirit revealed a very ugly truth to me. And it was in this moment that I've had my most transformative cry. And the way the Spirit revealed this to me was very shocking, because it didn't say it in a very godly way. Like, it wasn't a very thunderous voice speaking to me. The tripped out part is the Spirit spoke in my own voice to me to convict me. And what the Spirit said while I was driving through southern Louisiana back to Dallas, after I had just dropped off a young lady in her hometown, who a day or two before I had just introduced to my mom and to my family as your next or your future daughter-in-law. And as I'm driving back after dropping this young lady off, I barely made it outside of the city of Alexandria. And the Spirit spoke to me, and he told me in my own voice, "You're just like your father." And it was as if a deer or something had run across the street, and I'd run into it head on. The car came almost to an immediate stop. I had to pull over to the side of the road, because the tears were falling from my eyes so heavy. It was as if I was driving through a hurricane with hurricane force winds and torrential downpours of rain. I could not see. And so I pulled over, and I was shaken to my core. And I did everything I could to try to find relief, to try to escape the moment. I called my mother because I wanted to apologize, because a week prior to introducing her to this young lady, I introduced her to another young lady. And the title that young lady was given was, "This is your future daughter-in-law." And so I wanted to apologize to my mother, because in my mind, I felt as if I was putting her through the same thing my father had put her through for so many years. But in my twisted mind, I was much better than my dad because I didn't do it the way my dad did. I didn't lie to anyone. In fact, I refused to get in relationships out of the fear that I couldn't be faithful. So I didn't want to be like my dad. So if I never entered into a relationship with you, how could I ever cheat on you? But here it is in this moment, I realized that even though I hadn't totally committed, and these young ladies and I that we were talking, we weren't in a well, I guess we were supposed to be in a monogamous relationship, but we were still in a trial type relationship because both were long distance. I realized that I was no different. I was no better than my father. And because in that instance, I'm realizing that I am like my father, I tried to call everybody in my contacts list. And this was back in the early 2000s. And so, I had my little flip phone, and I called my mom. She didn't answer. I called my sister. She didn't answer. I called one of my best friends. He didn't answer. I called the other best friend. He didn't answer. I called one of my best friend's brother. He didn't answer. And so here I am stuck on side the road, tears and snot running down my face. And nobody's answering the phone. It's like the spirit wanted me to stew in that for a moment. Because after about 10 minutes on side of the road, people started calling me back, and I started explaining to them my distress. And the first person to call me back was my mom. And you know how moms do. She wanted to tell me, "Oh boy, that's crazy. You're not like your dad." And then she wanted me to feel better. And that didn't work. And after I got off the phone with her, my sister called me back. I spoke to my sister for a while, and I apologized to her because she too had been introduced to these young ladies. And my sister, she's a little bit more level-headed, and she kind of let me say what I needed to say. And then she gave me some words of advice, and I moved on, and my best friend started calling me back. And then the last person I spoke to was my best friend's brother. And I got all of this off my chest, and it allowed me to at least the tears to stop so that I could start driving, because the last place you want to be is on side the road in Louisiana as a Black man. And so as I started driving back, I knew what I had to do. I had to end this relationship with one of these young ladies, and I had to tell her the truth. And that was killing me because, like my father, I was a crier. I grew to start crying very easily. In fact, it was one of the reasons why I wanted to stop living the life that I was living, because of all the women I dated, it was always the women that got hurt, and that bothered me. I would always rather that it was me that was on that short end of that stick. I suffer from this thing of being overly empathetic and sympathetic. So I cry easily. And I never thought that would be me, because we would grow up as children and we would mock my father and make fun of him, because at every scene, there was a sentimental moment. You would hear my father, who was this big burly dude, very intimidating looking. Out of nowhere, you would just hear him say something like, "Well, that's all right." And you see him wiping tears from his eyes. And me and my siblings, we would start giggling and laughing at him, because I'm like, here's this big dude crying at a movie. And we've seen this movie once or twice before, and he's still crying. And I guess, you should not make fun of people, because I grew up to be the same way. And each time I would hurt someone, it's as if I was hurting 2 or 3 times more than they were. And I would always resent the fact that I hurt this person. And so for the intentionality, it was revealed that God uses what breaks us down to build us up. I guess it's similar to what the enemy means for evil, God means for good. Because I did not like the fact that I was empathetic or sympathetic. I didn't like the fact that I cried so easily. And the person that I liked the least was my father. And the fact that I shared that with him, wasn't something I was proud of. But God would start using this moment, kind of let the scales fall from my eyes, and they came in the sense of tears, because I did go on to marry one of these young ladies, and to say that it was a tumultuous relationship would be an understatement as well. It was a long-lived 18-month marriage, and I would say there was probably only about 24 days of marital bliss in that 18 months. And so the person that I was left to turn to throughout all of this was my father. He was the person I went to talk about my woes in my marriage. Now, you have to understand, my father and I never carried on a conversation that lasted longer than 30 minutes. I'm sorry, 30 seconds. When I was in college and I would call home, if my dad answered the phone, he'd say, hello. I'm like, hey, Dad, hey, you want to talk to your mom? And I'm like, yep. And that was the extent of our conversations. But when I was going through this, I found that my dad was the person that I turned to help me not only understand the situation, but also to get things off of my chest, because I knew if I told my mom the nonsense that I was going through, she'd be at my house and she'd be wanting to have a talk with my wife. And she would tell me, you need to get out of that situation. And it may not seem like it, but I really was trying to fight for my marriage, all 18 months of it. And so I started talking to my father, and, I started to realize that the man wasn't as bad as I made him out to be. He definitely wasn't perfect. And all the things that he did, he did. All the times he stepped out on my mom, he actually did those. All the fights, all the arguments, all the times he called her out of her name. It wasn't like I was forgetting the fact that he had taken me here and we worked on this part of my game. Those things never happened. But what I didn't have was context to who my father was. Like, I never thought about the fact that his father was never in his life, that he was raised by his mom and his 5 older sisters. And when I say older, the oldest was like 22 years older than my father. He was the baby of 9. And so he was raised by women. And all his life, women told him what to do, and he had to do it. And so my father is giving me these nuggets of advice, and he's telling me about situations, and he's encouraging me in these moments. And I would have never seen that coming. And then he would say some things that would remind me of why I thought about him the way that I did. And he would say something like, well, son, what you have there, we call that is you just have yourself a typical woman. Uh-huh. He's like, you think your mom, and then he'd lose me because I'm not trying to hear anything about my mom on this call. I'm not trying to have you go off and justify why you were the way you were. And then he would say something like, son, you just need to go out there and, get you a little side piece. I'm like, what? You're like, all men cheat. I'm like, no, they don't. And I'm not one of them that do. Right? But I needed someone to vent to. And I found it more naturally than I thought it would be to go to my father and to relay to him my concerns, the things that I was dealing with. And that leads me to the maturation piece of this. Crying allowed me to see things clear. It allowed me to see that I had some things that I needed to change in my life. It allowed me to have perspective. And at this time in my life, I wouldn't even say I was in the Christian phase. I was definitely God-fearing. I knew Jesus, but I wasn't living a Christian life. I wasn't dedicating myself. I tried churches. I would church hop, been to the Potter's house a few times, right? But I wouldn't say I was anywhere close to living a righteous spiritual life. And so when this first hit me, it wasn't even that it moved the dial to say, you need to be in church. It just told me I needed to do better. And then the wisdom that I received from my father, all of it didn't sit right with me. And that also allowed me to see the maturation parts of my life, because my father did help me out in a lot of situations. And in a lot of instances, he did calm me when I wanted to do something stupid. Like my father, I'm hot-headed. I'm not a stranger to anger. And there were times when my father would tell me, hey, you need to get out the house. You need to do this. You need to do this to take your mind off of that. You need to think about your stepdaughter. You don't want to put her in that situation. Remember the times and how it affected you when you would see your mom and I argue and fight. So you have to think about that. So my maturation allowed me to discern, what was good, just, or righteous from my father and what was garbage. Because when he said all men cheat, and maybe I should get out there and relieve some of my tensions by finding someone else while I was still married, that didn't sit right with me. And even though I was angry and I probably would have done something else stupid, that was one stupid thing that did not ring true. Because I knew that not to be righteous. I knew that not to be the right thing. And at an earlier time in my life, I probably would have said, yeah, you know what, you're right, because that was my existence. The clarity that crying gave me reminded me or let me know that I was a flawed person, that I was no better than my father. That although my father had committed things or done things that hurt myself and my siblings and hurt my mom, I was no better because I was doing things that hurted somebody else's mother, someone else's child, someone else's siblings. But the other thing that crying did to me was it revealed that I needed a village. I had always taken for granted the fact that I was raised in a village. I knew there was people at my house every day. I knew we partied 5 out of 7 days a week, right? But I never knew that I needed a village. I didn't think about it in that context. But when that storm hit me on the road coming back from Louisiana, I knew in that moment I needed people to talk to. And that's why I started going through my contact list, because I needed to be able to hear voices different than my own. I needed to be able to apologize. I needed to be lifted up. And then finally, it confirmed that I needed Christ. Because if I would fast forward about 15 years, no, I'm sorry, 7 years. If I fast forward 7 years, I had my first child out of wedlock, just like my father. And the first time I held my son, as soon as the nurses had kind of wiped him up and put a diaper on him and swaddled him, I was the first person to hold my son. And as I was sitting there, staring down at him, looking at his old, crumpled up face, my son came out looking like a 80-year-old man. And he was sucking on his lips. And it was funny to me. But as soon as he opened his eyes and we locked eyes, I immediately began to cry. And the first thought that went through my head was, I'm not enough. I had sacrificed the whole 9 months of his conception, this marriage that I had that lasted for 18 months. A year later, year and a half later, we were trying to make it work again when we got news that this young lady was pregnant and she wasn't my ex-wife. So that was over. That derailed that. And I wasn't going to sacrifice any attention from my son to deal with foolishness. But when I looked at this boy, I didn't feel I was happy, but joy wasn't the first thing that hit me. The first thing that hit me was this awesome responsibility that I now had. And I knew in that moment, I was not enough. I knew without having to dwell on it or anything, I needed Christ. I needed to be a better man. I needed to be a man more like Christ if my son was going to ever have a fruitful life. And I made up in my mind, standing in that hospital, I can still see vividly as if I was standing outside my body, what I was wearing, how I looked, the tie I had on, that I need Christ in my life if I'm going to be a father to this son. And that started me on my journey to be where I am today. I had no intentions of being a church-going man because I was very critical of the church. Never thought I'd be a deacon, never had any intentions of working in ministry, didn't think I would meet my wife in the church. But again, God is intentional. God uses those things that we thought were meant to break us down, to build us up and to prepare us. And he doesn't rush us through our maturation process. And I was watching a movie yesterday, and it struck me that this happened. I'll end on this. And it was the movie 42, the biopic about Jackie Robinson. And Jackie Robinson was flying back into town. He'd been moved up to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And he had a personal chauffeur in the movie. And the chauffeur was waiting outside the airport to pick him up. Jackie wanted to hail a cab. And he was a little annoyed that the man was there again. And when they got into the car, the driver, the guy who had befriended him, who was kind of his errand boy and doing everything, because, you know, back then still had segregation. He told Jackie that it's not as if he was going through this. And I'm kind of summarizing this. And that he was there every step of the way as well, just like his wife was, and that Jackie wasn't going through this alone. Jackie Robinson looked up in the movie, understanding the men's point. And Jackie Robinson said, "I don't like needing anyone for anything." And I think too often that is our mentality as men, but especially as Black men, is that we don't like needing anyone for anything. I know that was me. But what Jackie Robinson was admitting in that instance was he was thankful he had all these people in his corner, because he knew that without them, he could have never gone through this. And so the two questions that I came up with is, we're at the end of 2021, heading into 2022, what worldly shackles you plan to leave behind? And lastly, what, if anything, has been your most transformative cry? I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Willie. I appreciate that, man.